Let me say that again. The cost of the federal bureaucracy went up 80% in 10 years.
That is just gross. Guys, like, think about $71 billion. $71 billion. If that's hard to picture, picture 71 hospitals.
Mark Carney is barreling ahead with his gun ban and confiscation scheme, but taxpayers are fighting back. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation just launched a court fight against Carney's gun ban and confiscation scheme. Plus, government bureaucracy is out of control here in Canada. Canadian governments added 950,000 extra government employees since 2015. We're going to get Chris Sims on the show to break down the latest bombshell report about bloated government bureaucracy here in Canada. Stay tuned. It's Clips with Chris to go over the taxpayer news of the week you don't want to miss. But first, we've got the Canadian Taxpayers Federation's Gage Hobrick and Devin Drover coming on the show to break down what is going on with Carney's gun ban and confiscation scheme, what's going to be happening next, and how taxpayers can keep fighting back and win. My chat with Gage and Devin coming up next. All right, well, we've got a lot going on with the federal government's gun ban and confiscation scheme, including a new taxpayer legal challenge against it launched by the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. So I've got two of my friends and colleagues here on the show to break down everything that's going on with Ottawa's gun ban and confiscation scheme. We've got Gage Hobrick, the CTF's Prairie Director, a huge expert on this issue. And then we also have Devin Drover, the CTF's in-house lawyer, who's going to break down all the legal issues with the gun ban and confiscation. So Gage, I want to start with you because the government launched this pilot project of its gun ban and confiscation scheme in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. So why don't you just start, Gage, by giving us an overview, right? What happened during the pilot project and now where is the government heading with its gun ban and confiscation?
Yeah, well, kind of nothing happened, really, when we talk about it. When the government launched this pilot project back in September, they said it was going to run for 6 weeks and they were going to collect 200 of the now banned firearms. But reports, not from the federal government itself, show that they got a maximum of about 22 firearms, right? So that's an 11% success rate. I mean, if you got 11% on a test, that's all but a failure. I think that's an F minus when you get to that point. So the government's not doing well with this program. But unfortunately, the public safety minister has still said that after the results of this program, which he hasn't released yet officially, that the government is going to be going full steam ahead to try to keep the program going nationally, despite the failure.
Yeah, failure, big fat F. I mean, yeah, so they got about, I don't know, I'm just going to say 10%. They got about 10% of the guns that they wanted to get. And so this was clearly a failure. The Cape Breton pilot project of the government was a failure. Now, Devin, along with being our in-house lawyer at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, you're also our Atlantic director, and you did a lot of work on the ground in Cape Breton opposing the gun ban and confiscation from Ottawa. So, Devin, why don't you just break down what you did on the ground and what the people of Cape Breton did to push back against Ottawa?
Absolutely, Franco. And, I was so proud to be on the ground in Cape Breton after they launched the pilot project for the gun confiscation program. And, I think we sent a loud message. Cape Bretoners sent a loud and clear message to the government in Ottawa that they will not be guinea pigs for this pilot program or for this gun confiscation program as a whole. Here in Cape Breton, we had a huge rally. We had hundreds of Cape Bretoners come out in force. And this was during the middle of the day, mind you. So, people took off work. People called in sick. Maybe let's not rat on those folks. But, people came out in huge numbers.
They called in sick and tired of the federal government's confiscation.
Exactly. And, we had hundreds of people come out to this rally where they stood shoulder to shoulder all day long in front of the Cape Breton Regional Police headquarters, calling on the federal government to scrap this program. We had dozens and dozens and dozens of cars honk and show their support. We had lots of people drop by, bring coffee, bring Timbits, bring all that good stuff, water. People showed a lot of support there. And, it was really inspiring to me. I spoke to many Cape Bretoners who were totally disgusted by this program, totally disgusted that The Liberal government in Ottawa was attacking their rural way of life in one respect. Spoke to many hunting and sports shooters, which, these firearms have been part of their heritage. These are firearms that they've legally owned for decades, have been passed down in their families for decades. It's fundamentally, part of their heritage, no differently than other, important cultural things for them. And now they're being told that they're going to become criminals if they don't get rid of these firearms. So, it was inspiring to talk to so many Cape Bretoners who were out loud and saying that they will not comply with this program. And after that huge rally, that very successful rally we had a town hall in which we offered legal advice to Cape Bretoners about the program. And for those who are not aware, there's a federal amnesty program in place right now. And that essentially means that, you don't need to turn in your firearm, your legal firearm, even if it's on the ban list, until at least next October. So, we gave a lot of advice to people there in Cape Breton that they're under no obligation right now to turn in their firearms. We're glad to see that the advice worked based on that 11% number.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot can happen in a year. That's the message I keep sharing with people. There could be a new election. Parliament almost fell last week. There could be a new election in which, a new government gets rid of this program. There could be a reversal from this policy. We've already seen cracks within the Liberal government of even, the public safety minister saying, this program might not be the best idea. So, I think, the message that was shared on the ground there, that we're continuing to share with legal firearm owners who reach out to us, our legal email address, is that firearm owners legally can still own these guns, even if they're on the ban list. And they should absolutely not comply with the program until they absolutely need to.
Yeah. Oops. The public safety minister accidentally told the truth. And our supporters will remember from a previous episode when we played that leaked audio from the public safety minister. Devin, great job on the ground there. Loved our tax fighters out there pushing back against this taxpayer boondoggle. Yeah. So, Gage, back to you. I mean, obviously, from the government's perspective, the Cape Breton pilot project was a total failure. Now, here's what I keep struggling with, right? Like, you hear a bunch of police associations speaking out against the government's gun ban and confiscation scheme. You hear a ton of opposition from the provinces. So, Gage, who does the government expect to enforce this thing?
Well, I think they've got their head in the sand on the thing for the whole program, right? Because even in the story about the 22 guns that they got, the 10% number, the public safety minister said something is like, we worked out some technical glitches of the program. That's what people were looking at. So not the 10% guns that he got back. But as you point out rightly, it's not clear at all how the government actually plans to enforce this and start confiscating guns from people across the rest of the country. Because in the place where they actually had a police force agreed to help in Cape Breton, they only got that 10%. They only have one other police force with a confirmed agreement across the country, and that's in Winnipeg, right? And as you point out, other police forces like the Ontario Provincial Police, the biggest police force in Ontario, have said, we're not touching this with a 10-foot pole. So how are they going to do that? It's not clear at all. We've got the governments of both Alberta and Saskatchewan passing laws to make it harder for the feds to go to those provinces and take guns. So it's the clear thing here is not how they're going to do it, but that it's going to take the government essentially still has no idea how they're going to go and confiscate these guns, and it doesn't look like it's going to work. And that's a good thing for taxpayers if that's not going to happen. But at the end of the day, the government should kind of just see the writing on the wall and get rid of the thing.
Speaking of the government not knowing or not having any idea what it's talking about or what it's doing, every time I hear politicians have a press conference to talk about this gun ban and confiscation, I have a feeling they have no idea what they're talking about. And Devin, I want you to bring you back in here and to put your lawyer hat back on for this question, because I've heard multiple politicians claim that this gun ban and confiscation scheme is voluntary. Like, oh, don't worry, it's voluntary, folks. Devin, what do you make of that?
I mean, it's only voluntary if you want to go to jail. This is just massive spin from our politicians in Ottawa. You can voluntarily comply with any law, but if you don't, you're going to face the consequences. So, You can voluntarily comply with the gun confiscation program, but if you don't, after the amnesty period is over, you're a criminal. That's what they're saying. You can go to jail or otherwise face sanctions. So I think the reason they're doing this is the federal government is well aware this program is unpopular. They're well aware it's doomed to fail. And that's why they're choosing to use words like voluntary rather than admit the program for what it is, which is a program that targets law-abiding gun owners, not criminals. And it is a program in which the federal government is going to confiscate the private property of law-abiding firearms owners while doing nothing to make Canadians safer. So it's just more spin, more of the same coming from Ottawa. It's no more voluntary than not paying your income tax. I'm sure that's not exactly what one would consider voluntary. Just more big government spin from a government that is out of touch and is pushing through a very unpopular program.
All right, Gage. Well, we're the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and we've gone through about 10 minutes of this interview without talking about the hit to taxpayers of this boondoggle. So let's bring it back in. I've heard a lot of numbers being thrown out around about the potential cost of the gun ban and confiscation scheme. Gage, what are the numbers? How much is this gun ban and confiscation scheme going to cost taxpayers?
Well, I think to start off again, as I've started off every comment, basically, the government still has no idea what it's doing on this file either, even when it comes to the cost. The government's been increasingly vague. The estimates keep jumping, and it's not clear at all, right? So we go all the way back to 2019. The Liberal Party in their election platform then said it would cost taxpayers $200 million to do this confiscation. Then we saw that the Parliamentary Budget Officer did a report where it would cost up to $756 million, but that was just for gun compensation, just to get the guns. It doesn't include administrative costs or anything like that, right? We saw some internal government documents that were dug up that said $2 billion, right? So that's a huge jump from then even. And then we've seen other independent experts, some academics, that the cost could hit $6 billion. And I think there's an important part there as well, because the government is now touting that, oh, we've allocated $742 million to this. That's what it's going to cost. I mean, call me a skeptic, but I can't exactly remember a time when a government program, especially a federal government program, came on time and on budget. And the perfect example of that is their last attempt at gun control, right? When they did the long gun registry, which was not that expansive a program. All it was an online registry of certain types of firearms, right? The government said that was going to cost $2 million with an M, but by the time the dust had settled, we got to $2 billion with a B. So taxpayers should not be taking the government's $742 million number with anything else than a grain of salt, because the government loves to spend way more than they say they're going to on these programs, and this one's been a failure from the start, so that's very likely. So these numbers aren't clear. So of course, as the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we went looking to find out what's the actual estimates hidden in some government documents, and we filed some ATIPs to find out how much is it going to cost for RCMP if they're going to use RCMP to go in and confiscate guns, but the federal government so far has refused to tell us those numbers.
Yeah, okay, so Devin, let's bring you in, right? Because now we got a legal fight that we launched. We send in these access to information requests, right, to get the numbers, like how much is this going to cost? The government is being about as transparent as a coconut. So now you're launching a legal challenge on behalf of taxpayers to force the government to come clean with the cost. So Devin, what's going on there? What's going on with their legal fight?
Absolutely. So we've officially launched a court fight to force transparency on the true cost of Ottawa's gun ban and confiscation program. So to give a bit more background, as Gage alluded to, we filed some requests. So here at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we file thousands of access information requests every year trying to figure out how government is wasting your money. So we filed one asking for cost projections from the RCMP in using these in implementing this program. We got one back from the RCMP's Pacific region, so that's British Columbia, which estimated costs there. But when we requested costs from the other RCMP offices or regions, they have refused to tell us. So, we waited about a year from that initial request until we had to file a complaint with the Information Commissioner. This is the government watchdog that's supposed to protect, and support Canadians in getting access information. We filed a complaint in April of 2024. It is now a year and a half later, and we've been basically stonewalled. The commissioner's done nothing. We've been given no timeline. They say there's an investigator assigned who will take submissions. We give submissions and time pass, and then there's a new investigator assigned and we give submissions and nothing happens. And, essentially what we've done now is filed a application in federal court to compel the information commissioner to make a ruling on our investigation, so that Canadians have a legal right to know what the program will cost. And this isn't just me being some Looney Tune, weirdo lawyer who's obsessed with principles here. This is established in law. The Supreme Court of Canada, Canada's top court, has been clear. Access to information laws exist to protect democracy. If Canadians can't have information or access information in a timely manner, then their freedom of expression rights are being violated. And that's exactly what's happening here. We have a massive program of public interest that Canadians, that us here at the CTF, can't access information on. And that is fundamentally wrong. So, we're asking the court, the first step is very simple. We're asking a judge to order the information commissioner to finish her job, finish the investigation, and tell Canadians what the government is refusing to release. And that is the cost of this boondoggle. So, Canadians have a right to know the price tag for this, and we're going to keep on fighting until we get access to that information.
Oh, go get him, Devin. Love it. We got a little pit bull lawyer, and it makes me so happy. All right, so we're winding down here on this interview. Let's see what we've covered. We covered the absolute failure of the government's pilot project in Cape Breton. We covered a lot about the provinces speaking out, a lot of police associations not wanting to touch it with a 10-foot pole, as what Gage said. We covered the government spin, them claiming that this is voluntary. Wrong. We covered the taxpayer costs. We covered the taxpayer legal challenge. There's one last issue that we have to cut through here, because the government is claiming that its gun ban and confiscation targeting law-abiding Canadians is to improve safety. Well, Gage, let's bring it back in here. What are the experts saying when it comes to the gun ban and public safety?
Yeah, well, once again, it's a clear failure from the government on public safety. Taxpayers don't think it's worth the money. Firearm owners certainly don't think it's going to make anyone safer. But it's not just regular everyday people. It's the experts who are out there doing law enforcement and the academics who study this thing, right? We've seen academics from Mount Royal and the University of Toronto both say that these gun confiscation programs don't reduce crime because the only people who are participating in them are people who follow the law. And that's common sense, but that's what the studies show. And then we get to the law enforcement, we see the exact same thing. The National Police Federation, who represent RCMP members all across the country, say that the gun grab diverts extremely important personnel, resources, and funding away from addressing the important issue, which is stopping the illegal smuggling of guns. I know you've done interviews with other police associations that say much of the same thing.
Yeah, speaking of that, right, let's throw to a clip here on an interview I had with Clayton Campbell, the head of the Toronto Police Association. I just asked Mr. Campbell straight up, what is this going to do for public safety? Let's watch that back and forth here. Well, with the government announcing its intentions to go forward with the gun ban and so-called buyback, I call it a confiscation scheme, but I thought it was very important to have you on the show, and I thought it was very important for our people to hear from you and your organization, who represent the men and women in blue, whose task it is to keep us safe, right? So let's just start with the most important question. Do you think the gun ban and so-called buyback will actually make Canada more safe?
So, I can speak to the city of Toronto. That's where I'm so proud to represent almost 8,700 members that are out there keeping the city of Toronto safe. And I can tell you the gun buyback program is going to have zero impact on gun crime in the city of Toronto. We deal with a lot of shootings, unfortunately. We seized about 700 illegal guns last year, almost 90% sourced from the US. And I can't think of one occasion where a legal gun has been used in a crime. They're all unlawful guns in the possession of thugs and gangsters that aren't allowed to have them in the first place, or even prohibited to have them from a previous conviction. So I don't see any impact on gun crime in the city of Toronto with this gun ban.
Well, there you have it, folks. Pretty clear cut. That's directly from the man who heads up the association representing the men and women in blue who are tasked with keeping the streets safe. And look, I'm not an expert when it comes to public safety, right? But like, I don't know. This just seems like such a half-baked idea because this gun ban and confiscation, by definition, targets law-abiding Canadian citizens. Again, I'm not an expert when it comes to public safety, but I'm pretty sure criminals with illegal guns aren't going to go knock on the doors of a government office or police HQ and turn over their illegal guns to the government or the police.
Well, Franco, the important part about there is that they can't even, right? The whole program is only for legal gun owners. If you own a gun illegally, you can't participate in the program. It's only for people who previously owned the banned guns legally. It will take exactly 0 illegal guns off the street by definition.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it just keeps getting dumber and dumber, folks, just when you thought it wasn't possible. Okay, Gager, last word to you. What do you think the government should do? What is your message to Prime Minister Mark Carney on his gun ban and confiscation scheme?
Well, simple advice from taxpayers. Stop this taxpayer boondoggle and scrap the gun ban. You know, it's clear that the gun grab from a start has been a failure. It's clear that it's going to cost taxpayers a bunch of money, and it's clear that it's not going to make anyone safer. The government needs to stop pushing forward with this scheme and finally get rid of it once and for all.
Well, there you go, folks. Devin and Gage take the government to task on its gun ban and confiscation scheme. What has been going on, where the fight is heading next. Folks, that was pretty good. That was a great interview. Hey, man, Gage is so smart, just understands the nitty gritty of the details. And I just love having Devin as our in-house lawyer, the pit bull, fighting for taxpayers in the court of law and public opinion. All right, folks, coming up next, stay tuned. It's Clips with Chris going over the big taxpayer news you don't want to miss. Stay tuned. All right, we've got Chris Sims on the show. It is Clips with Chris to go over the big taxpayer news stories you don't want to miss. Simmer, you ready?
Yeah, I am, but I'm just going to turn the tables on you for this show because there's a couple of stories that were out this week that were nuts. I wanted to start with the Fraser Institute. Our friends over there have this crazy report on basically employment numbers in Canada, but specifically how much government employs people and what a big share they take of that employment number. What did you think of this report?
Oh, it's crazy. It's absolutely bombshell. Let me start with a quote. Employment growth in Canada has been inflated by growth in government employment, a trend that cannot continue if Canadians are to maintain their standard of living. Right? So look, I think most people like watching the show, listening along, understand that Canada's economy, like for the average worker, it ain't doing so great. And this report just goes to show how government bureaucrat job growth is inflating even the dismal numbers behind Canada's economy. Now, Chris, let me just say 2 more things, okay? Canadian governments, okay, plural, Canadian governments added 950,000 extra employees since 2015. Okay, that accounts for a third of Canada's job growth since 2015. Let me just say that again. 950,000 extra government employees since 2015. A third of Canada's new jobs have been funded by taking more money from taxpayers.
This is, to borrow a phrase from the parliamentary budget officer, this sounds unsustainable, Franco. Like, there's only so much blood that regular working people outside of government have to give to the parasite that is government. If you tip those scales too much, things are going to become unbalanced. Are we already there?
Okay, let me read you another quote just to
Okay.
just to nail it, right? Okay, look, quote, of these nearly 2.9 million additional jobs added since 2015, 950,000 were in the public sector, i.e. government, okay? This means that almost 1/3 of all additional net jobs added by the Canadian labor market between 2015 and 2024 were closely linked to the government. Again, let me just repeat this, folks, okay? Canadian governments added 950,000 additional employees since 2015. That accounts for like a third of Canada's job growth over the last decade.
And this isn't including so-called jobs created by corporate welfare handouts to private companies, does it? Do you know if Fraser got into that granular level of detail? I don't think so.
No. So I read the full report. I mean, typically though, so I don't know exactly what it would account for, but typically when you hear public sector, it means like directly paid for by the government. Okay, so it means like government bureaucrats. It also means like teachers, nurses, things of that nature. Now you might be saying, okay, well, are we just having a bunch of extra teachers, extra nurses, extra doctors?
I was just about to ask you that.
Fair
the administrator number is crazy. Give her.
Yeah. Fair question. Government administration, okay, the bureaucrats, the paper pushers in Ottawa, has grown even faster than overall government sector employment since 2015. So you think of this massive number, this massive increase in the number of government employees, 950,000 extra government employees across all levels since 2015. Well, there were 328,000 more government administration bureaucrats in 2024 than there were in 2015. So even as like the massive increase in the number of government employees has gone up, it's really government administration that has grown even faster than the total number of extra government employees.
So we're having more government managers managing more managers managing more managers.
Yeah, the bureaucracy is out of control. The bureaucracy is out of control. I mean, look, I love that you said like there's almost so much, you can't really draw more blood from a stone here. I mean, look, the government is plucking the golden goose, right? Like even though every normal person knows Canada's economy is not doing well, it's been stagnating for quite some time. I mean, what this report even shows is essentially what all Canadians already kind of understood to be true, right? That the economy is being propped up by more and more tax dollars paying for more and more government paper pushers. Look, in some places in Canada, like in Atlantic Canada, government employment now represents about 30% of all employment. Like, this is nuts.
That doesn't really surprise me, unfortunately. I think I was looking at Alberta's numbers. It's around 18% to give a comparison.
Yeah, Alberta's is 18%. So Alberta's 18% is on the lower side. I mean, even that, right? Almost a fifth of the entire jobs is crazy, right?
Is government.
Like it's government, right? But then taken to its extremes in Atlantic Canada, about 30% of all the jobs are government bureaucrats or government jobs, right? Like, think about it, right? Like in the private sector, this is what creates wealth. This is the voluntary sector, right? This is where the productivity is. It's the government. Government doesn't have any money, right? Government either takes the money from taxes today, taxes plus interest tomorrow, or the money printer, which is inflation. It's another form of taxation, right? So the government doesn't have a bucket of cash lying around to pay these bureaucrats. All of these extra bureaucrats, all of these extra government employees, 950,000 extra government employees over the decade, all of that is taken from taxpayers. So you asked earlier on, is this unsustainable? Yeah, if things don't change, it sure is unsustainable. I mean, look at this. You have a bigger and bigger government class taking more money from the private sector, right? It's the makers versus the takers, the taxpayers versus the tax consumers.
I was just about to ask you about makers versus takers. You and I were talking a lot about that leading up to the last federal election. And as the late Charlie Kirk would often say, big government sucks. It really does. And I think these numbers show that. It shows the government getting bigger and bigger. It's costing us then more and more money. And I will just point out that back when I was on Sun News Network, we interviewed Mark Stein, and he was sounding the alarm about too many people growing up wanting to become a government bureaucrat. He said that A, it costs taxpayers a ton of money, but B, it causes a lack of ingenuity. It causes a lack of wealth development and creation and innovation. If this is just another cog in the government wheel, we're not just losing out on the money, right, Franco? We're losing out on that spark. That's no longer going to be there to generate new wealth. It's just going to be stuck on a government shelf somewhere.
Yeah, that's a great point. And this report actually touches on one of the issues of productivity, right? Like you've probably heard all the smart people, all the eggheads talk about how Canada's in like this productivity crisis, right? We've been hearing it for years now. Well, the report actually says, well, guess what? It's because you're taking all of these resources out of the productive sector and you're stuffing it into more government bureaucrats, more government employees, right? Like you're taking resources, you're taking workers, employees out of the private sector, and you're putting them behind the golden gates of government. And, you know, to go back to the earlier part of this conversation, the extra 950,000 government employees added since 2015, like you're right to point out that this doesn't include, you know, a lot of the different corporate welfare where, you know, a company is private, essentially a name only, where it's either getting a large amount of funds from the taxpayer, i.e. through corporate welfare. Remember, federal corporate welfare alone costs taxpayers like $11 billion annually, right? But also then too, you just have like other private corporations that get their money, a large chunk of it, to provide services to the government.
And there's more money going out the door. Sorry, it makes me frustrated because, again, it's diverting youth into thinking they need to go find some government job, which then takes them out of the productive end of the workforce and winds up costing us money. I have a lot of family connection back in Atlantic Canada. I lived there for a time. It does affect the culture. It does. If you start becoming dependent on government like this, including for your very livelihood, it affects the get up and goedness. It affects the risk taking. It affects the imaginativeness of wanting to explore, say, developing new natural resources, starting a new business for realsies from scratch, employing people yourself. Like, it isn't like the money is very important here, what the Fraser Institute's pointing out, but it's sapping the creativity and the productivity too. And that's why I like how you described it as makers versus takers.
Yeah, and so let me just recap again. Kudos to the Fraser Institute. Really is another great report from them. Let me just recap. Then we can go into federal a little bit here. So remember, Canadian governments, all levels, have added 950,000 extra employees since 2015. Like that is crazy. That is such a big number. But also just the fact that that accounts for about a third of the entire job growth over the decade is government employment. Like that's nuts. And like, you know, I mean, obviously I'm the federal director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, so I focus largely on federal, but there's also good reason to do that because we've seen an absolute massive increase in the federal bureaucracy over the last decade. So the Fraser Institute, they estimate that the federal government alone added, you know, about 100,000 employees over the last 10 years, an increase of 43%. Okay. So the number of federal governments or employees went up about 43% over a decade. Total employment in Canada, including government employees, grew under 17% over that same time. So the increase in the number of government employees federally went up 43%. The increase in total employment over that same time period went up 16.9%.
Sickening. Okay. Sorry, folks. You're going to have to grab the Pepto-Bismol for the next round of questions because, Franco, thank you for sending me this story early. Every now and then you surprise me with some stats and I almost cry, but I'm glad I'm prepared for this one. You sent me a piece that you did here based on public accounts, and it is the cost of this growth of bureaucracy. What was the annual cost last fiscal of our federal bureaucracy for taxpayers?
Right. And now, Chris, this is this news story is from Canadian Taxpayers Federation. We dove through the government's own public accounts. So these are all government numbers. OK, these are all government numbers online. Now, remember, it's not just the number of employees that matters. It's the cost, right? The higher salaries, the bonuses, the perks like the platinum pensions. Well, folks, last year, the cost of the federal bureaucracy was $71.4 billion. So last year, the federal bureaucracy cost you, dear taxpayer, $71.4 billion. Okay. Go back 10 years ago, and the federal bureaucracy cost $39.6 billion. So in 2015-16, the federal bureaucracy cost $39.6 billion. In 2024-25, the federal bureaucracy cost $71.4 billion. Folks, the cost of the federal bureaucracy went up 80% in 10 years. Let me say that again. The cost of the federal bureaucracy went up 80% in 10 years.
That is just gross. Guys, like, think about $71 billion. $71 billion. If that's hard to picture 71 hospitals all in a row and how long it would take you to even drive past that many hospitals. That's how much money we're spending on the federal bureaucracy. Like, Franco, you've been sounding the alarm, and kudos to you, about the size and cost of the federal bureaucracy for years now. I'm sorry to ask you this, man, but are we hearing a sense of alarm coming from the opposition? Like, somebody better be freaking out about this right about now.
Yeah, so, sometimes it feels like I'm just smacking my head against the wall and all I'm doing is giving myself a black eye, a little conky or something like that. Yeah. But look, we're starting to see the needle being pushed in the right direction, right? A lot of it because of the work that we do at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. So thanks to our supporters or tax fighters who make sure that we have an investigative shop here in Ottawa so that we can dig into these numbers, find the waste. But also too, it's easy to get depressed when you see these debt deficit borrowing numbers, but we are moving in the right direction. We have now seen Poilievre, he was on CTV saying that, yes, we do have to find billions of dollars of savings in the federal bureaucracy. You also start to see the Liberals at least acknowledge that there's a spending problem, right? So, at least they're forced to acknowledge that there's a spending problem because people think it's crazy. As of yet, Carney is still spending billions upon billions of dollars more every single year. But even Carney is having to talk about reducing the number of bureaucrats in Ottawa.
At least it's being talked about now. And I would like to think that now that, Pierre Poilievre, he's the leader of the opposition, and he's also a member of parliament, his riding is no longer right up against the heat vent that is Parliament Hill. So that was always dicey for him. I'm just going to be blunt, because he needed people to be door knocking for him and getting votes in that old riding that he used to have. And it was full of bureaucrats. But now, don't know last time you've been out to Battle River Crowfoot, but not a huge population of federal bureaucrats out there. So I'm hoping that there's going to be a little bit more vinegar there.
Now you're just teasing me that I'm no longer in Alberta and I'm forced to be here in Mordor, aka the Swamp of the North, aka Ottawa. Now, look, Chris, okay, so absolutely mind-boggling, right? We started this little segment talking about the total number of employees, government employees going up, all across all different levels. Then we shifted to the federal bureaucracy, and that the cost of the federal bureaucracy has gone up 80% in a decade. Now, the question that everyone should be asking themselves is are you getting 80% better services from the federal bureaucracy? Well, unless you're a federal bureaucrat taking a higher taxpayer funded salary, I think the answer to that is a big fat no. But it's not just our little guessing games here. We actually commissioned Leger, a national polling firm, to ask Canadians, right? Do you think federal services have gotten better or worse since 2016? And Canadians said, despite the massive increase in the federal bureaucracy, half of Canadians say federal services have gotten worse. Okay? Not half saying services have gotten better, not half saying services have stayed the same. No, even though there's been a massive spike in the federal bureaucracy, half of Canadians say services have gotten worse.
Sick. And we're paying for it. This is it. The debt continues to rise. They keep piling on more and more every year. I'm just very glad, A, that the Fraser Institute put out that report, and B, that you dug through public accounts. Those numbers, I was bracing myself when I saw the headline, but they were worse than I was expecting. The price tag of a $71 billion bureaucracy, they've got to wake up from this stupor. They have to break the spell that was cast by former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and realize that budgets don't balance themselves, and they have got to get this monster under control. My concern is, I was just speaking with a member of parliament the other day on the show, and he said that looking across the aisle, you're just still seeing all of the jawing. Like you're not seeing the kind of sober second thought, oh my goodness, adults in the room, we have to get the spending under control. I'm hoping though, if the tax fighters army keeps on pushing and pushing and pushing, that they'll be forced to pay attention to this. So like, what would you say to folks who are watching this? I know they love watching your show. Leave comments underneath the video. What would you say to folks who really want to stay in the fight and they just want to puke when they hear about how big and expensive our now very big government is?
Well, I would say to them, get another bucket because I'm about to lay some more bad news on you.
I thought you were done.
Yeah, no. It gets worse,
That's fine.
folks, because we're here in Ottawa where things seem to get worse. No, we'll get into some optimism in a second. But first, folks, like not only are you paying for way more in-house government bureaucrats, you're also paying way more for outside help. Okay, cost of bureaucracy up 80% in 10 years. The cost of contractors, consultants, and outsourcing more than doubled over those same 10 years. Okay, so in last year, the federal government dropped $23 billion on consultants, contractors, and outsourcing. $23 billion bucks. Okay, in 2015-16, the government spent $11 billion on consultants, contractors, and outsourcing. So in 10 years, the government spending on consultants, contractors, and outsourcing more than doubled. So what would I say to our supporters right now is hope we got another bucket on hand.
Okay, I didn't read that part. So that's way worse than I was expecting you to say. So you're saying then, if you add, I'm laughing because otherwise folks I'll cry. So don't come at me in the comments, okay? So what you're saying is the cost of the federal bureaucracy plus outside contracting, bloody, bloody, blah. Are you saying it's almost $100 billion? 71 plus 20?
Almost, yeah. 94 billion, 94 billion, 95 billion. And what are you getting? Like, honestly, folks, like, here's the thing. Like, what are you getting out of this? Honestly, like, what are you... we're laughing. Look, we're laughing because then we cry, but like the cost of federal bureaucracy up 80% in 10 years. And then on top of that, the cost of contractors, outsourcing, consultants, doubling in 10 years. It's like, wait, you just added all these bureaucrats. Like, I don't know, can't they pick up the phone? Like, can't they do the work? Like, why are you then going out and spending all this extra money on the consultants, the contractors, and the outsourcing? But look, we're laughing, blah, blah, blah. You don't laugh, you cry. I'm just going to keep banging my head against the wall. But folks, like a couple things, right? So number one, knowledge really is power, and especially in democracy, right? Because if you don't know things, you can't hold people accountable. So there's a couple things that you can do. Number one, make sure when you're watching this, you share this with your friends and your family, because the more Canadians that know what you know, the better able the larger taxpayer army can actually hold these politicians accountable. And the next time there's an election coming up and anyone's, singing for supper at your door, you can be like, no. I don't want to hear any of this about reining in spending. No, you got to cut, right? The time for the scalpel was years ago. Take out that chainsaw because, man, we got a lot of rot in Ottawa that we have to cut. But number two, right, like another thing you can do, go to taxpayer.com, hit the petition tab, sign one of the petitions, because that puts you in the taxpayer army when it's time to hammer politicians, when it's time to get involved in a taxpayer advocacy campaign. That's how you know about it, right? That's how you can take some action. So another thing I'll say is, like, don't get pessimistic, folks. I know we all have reason to be pessimistic given the numbers, but I think we've shown that we're capable of winning, right? When we focus on a key issue, when we focus on the carbon tax, bye, see you later. I know there's still another carbon tax that we're fighting, but we forced the Liberals to back down on their favorite tax, and that's because of you. We won on the capital gains tax hike fight, right? Yes, we did. And now what we got to focus on is we got to focus on the debt crunch and the bloated, ballooning bureaucracy. We got to focus on the spending, folks. That's our big fight.
I wonder if I could get a big government sucks bumper sticker approved. I think I might be able to.
Hey, and on that note, big government sucks. Is that what you just said? Yeah.
Big government sucks.
Yeah. I love that. On that note, folks, let's thank Chris Sims, our great tax fighter here, our CTF Alberta director. Chris, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you for the invite, Franco.
And everyone, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for having some fun with us today. But folks, I really do want to get your thoughts on the ballooning bureaucracy. Like, look, when I think about government finances, the way I think about it is that there is no way to fix the finances unless the government starts firing bureaucrats. Attrition ain't going to cut it. Pay cuts, a little bit of tinkering around the edges ain't going to cut it, right? When the federal government just added 100,000 bureaucrats in a decade, when you look at all the different levels of government adding 950,000 extra government employees over the decade, small little tinkering around the edges ain't going to cut it. Anyways, folks, that's my thoughts. Look, I think the bureaucracy is going to be one of the biggest fights in the coming weeks, months, and years, especially as the government union bosses try to light their hair on fire, run around, pretend to be Chicken Little. You know how it is. So, folks, let me know in the comments below, what do you think about the government bureaucracy? What do you think has to be done? I really think this is probably, if not the biggest, one of the biggest taxpayer fights that we're going to have in the weeks, months, and years ahead. Let me know in the comments below, folks. I'm Franco Terrazzano. I'm going to keep fighting against those big spending, big taxing, entitled politicians and bureaucrats. And I hope you keep fighting with us. Until next time.